Hello tonight. We're talking about why you can't stop overthinking. Not in the abstract sense, but in the way your mind keeps looping, just as your body tries to rest. Maybe it starts with a single comment someone made, a glance, a moment you replay for the third time. You're not solving anything. You're circling. It feels endless, doesn't it? Like your brain is trying to outthink something it doesn't know how to name. Maybe it's not that you're broken. Maybe your mind is tired. Maybe there are feelings beneath all this noise, waiting patiently to be felt. You're not going to fix your whole life tonight, and that's okay. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what we do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what's been quietly weighing on your mind this week? It's just a small thought, a flicker, something about a message you forgot to respond to, or maybe a strange expression on someone's face earlier today. But before you know it, your brain has latched on like a dog with a chew toy. You try to let it go, you scroll, you sip water, you check the time. But the thought has bloomed, not into a conclusion, but into a loop. And it keeps looping. At some point, you tell yourself it's just because you care, that you're being responsible, that you're trying to figure it out. But deep down, you know it's not really about answers. You're not solving anything. You're circling. You're thinking about thinking. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to tell where the thought ends and where you begin. You're not alone in this. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." You've probably heard that quote before on a podcast, a phone wallpaper, or stitched into the fabric of a motivational Instagram reel. But you don't really understand it until 2:37 a.m. when you're lying in bed and your brain keeps hitting replay. That's when it clicks. You're suffering not from life itself, but from your interpretation of it. The Stoics were not fans of rumination. They believed in directing your energy toward what you can control and releasing the rest, like breath, from the lungs. But how do you do that when the mind has turned into a feedback loop? You keep replaying the same thoughts because part of you believes there must be something you missed. If you just think it through, again, you'll find the key, the hidden detail, the one sentence that will change everything. You remember suddenly that time your coffee went cold while you stared into space. You weren't thinking about anything new, just the same problem you thought you'd solved the day before. You drank the same thought 4 times and expected it to taste different. It didn't. But you weren't doing nothing. You were busy. Overthinking masquerades as productivity. It makes you feel engaged, even virtuous, when all you're really doing is exhausting yourself. This is the trap. You mistake motion for meaning. There's a psychological term for this, analysis paralysis. But tonight, let's call it what it really is. Mental noise trying to protect you, because that's what it's doing, isn't it? Protecting you from making a mistake, from feeling something unbearable, from committing to something irreversible. Your thoughts don't trust your instincts. They don't believe the first answer was enough, so they spiral. There's a Buddhist teaching that says, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. That sounds simple, maybe even trite, But tonight, what if you imagined that to be true? What if the voice in your head wasn't the narrator of your life, but just another character, anxious, overachieving, and scared of silence? You might start to see the loop for what it is: not a flaw, but a system trying to keep you safe, even if that safety comes at the cost of your peace. You think of Descartes, who famously said, "I think, therefore I am." And you wonder if he ever lay awake at night, thinking himself into a corner. You smile at the thought. Then you sigh, because overthinking doesn't always feel like anxiety. Sometimes it just feels like home, like a well-worn path your feet know by memory, even when your soul longs for a different road. You've walked that path for years, maybe decades. You know every bend and rock. You know where the shadows fall. And yet, you can't stop walking it. But now something's shifting. You're starting to notice the loop. That's the first step. That flicker of awareness is your exit sign. You're beginning to see that overthinking isn't you. It's just something you're doing. Something you were taught to do. Something that kept you alive in moments when clarity would have hurt too much. You don't have to hate your mind for doing this. It's loyal in its own chaotic way. But tonight, as you lie there, with the ceiling watching you back, maybe you can say, "Thank you for trying to help, but we can rest now." And maybe for a moment, the loop softens. You feel tired, but not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. It's in your chest. It's in your neck. It hides behind your eyes and wraps itself around your thoughts like fog on a windshield. You keep thinking you need a break from work, from people, from your phone. But even when you take one, it doesn't help, because the heaviness isn't in your schedule. It's in your emotions. And your emotions are not finished with you. You try to rationalize your way out of it. You've done everything right. You're functioning. You reply to messages. You're eating. You're showing up. And still, your mind won't stop buzzing, whispering problems that don't have solutions. There's a reason for this. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." You carry unresolved feelings, like weights sewn into your clothes. At first, you forget they're even there. But eventually, walking starts to feel harder than it should. You wonder if the world got heavier, but it's you. It's what you've buried. Overthinking is often the surface symptom of unprocessed grief, or guilt, or fear, or desire. You replay conversations, not because you're vain or insecure, but because something in you wasn't allowed to speak the first time. You overplan because you were taught that failure is dangerous. You second-guess decisions because you never learned to trust your own voice. Somewhere along the way, you were told to suppress, not feel. So now your thoughts are doing the feeling for you, and they are loud. They think in all caps. You remember that one night a week ago, a month, when you sat in your parked car longer than you needed to. The music wasn't even playing. You just stared out the window as your brain filled the silence with everything you didn't want to feel. That wasn't rest. That was avoidance. And it's not your fault. Most people don't get taught how to process emotions. They get taught to perform them, or ignore them, or package them into productivity. You get praised when you're fine, when you don't make it weird, when you stay in control. But healing doesn't look like control. It looks like a mess. It looks like admitting I don't know what I'm feeling, but I know I can't pretend it away. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. And maybe that's what you're feeling. Not laziness, not weakness, but the spinning sensation of having choices, of facing emotions you didn't ask for, of wondering who you even are beneath the expectations you've memorized. There's a pressure to be okay, to be composed, to be reasonable. But what if your overthinking is just your body's way of saying, there is something inside you that hasn't been heard yet? What would happen if you let it speak? If you stopped analyzing the situation and started asking your feelings what they want? You might discover that the thought loop isn't logical. It's emotional. It's a coded cry for attention. And you, the real you, might be the one who needs to answer. You remember standing in the grocery store, frozen in front of the same shelf for 5 minutes, unable to decide between 2 brands of cereal. It wasn't about the cereal. It was about the exhaustion of caring about everything all the time. That decision was just the breaking point. It always is something small, because the big things stay unspoken. You've learned how to hide them well. Tonight, maybe you allow yourself to soften, not fix, not analyze, just feel. Maybe you cry a little, and not because you're weak, but because your body is finally processing the backlog of emotions it was never given time to handle. You let a sigh escape without catching it. You feel how heavy your shoulders are. You unclench your jaw. You stop bracing. This is not laziness. This is emotional repair. And maybe you start to see that your mind is not the enemy, it's the messenger. The loops are a signal, and the message isn't, you're broken. It's you're overdue for tenderness. You always thought that if you could just think hard enough, you could outsmart pain. That if you planned, better prepared more, stayed one step ahead, then nothing would surprise you. Nothing would break you. You would be safe. But the truth is, you've never really been in control, and your mind hates that. So it overcompensates. It builds scenarios, one after another. What they said, what you should have said, what might happen, what you'll do if it does. Your thoughts start stacking on top of each other, like a Jenga tower, built with anxiety and hope. But it's always teetering, always one thought away from collapse. And you can feel it in the tension in your stomach, in the way you can't seem to take a full breath, in how tired you are, despite doing nothing. You're not weak. You're afraid of chaos. The philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. But your judgments are trying to protect you." If you can label everything good bad, threat safe, then maybe you won't get blindsided again. Maybe you won't feel powerless. Control is comforting and addictive, but it's also exhausting. You remember the time you spent 3 hours researching a product you didn't even end up buying, or when you drafted 5 versions of a message, each one slightly different, agonizing overtone and timing. That wasn't strategy. That was fear. Fear disguised as caution. Fear trying to micromanage outcomes you were never supposed to control in the first place. And it's no wonder we live in a world that worships certainty, We're told that if you work hard enough, plan well enough, think through every possible scenario, you can avoid suffering, that you can earn safety. But that's not life. That's a spreadsheet fantasy. Real life is messy. People are unpredictable. Plans fall apart. And your mind can't compute that. So it tries harder. It runs simulations. It builds fences around feelings. It turns you into a one-person security team, guarding the borders of your own vulnerability. But nothing blooms in a fortress. There's a concept in Buddhism known as Shempa the hook that pulls you into reactivity. It's that split second when something triggers you and your thoughts race in to fill the space. You get hooked. You overanalyze. You try to manage the discomfort instead of feeling it. You've lived most of your life getting hooked because the discomfort of uncertainty feels unbearable. Not knowing feels like drowning, and overthinking is your way of treading water. But what if you didn't have to swim so hard? What if you let go, not of responsibility, not of reason, but of the belief that you can control what cannot be controlled? There's a quote often misattributed, but powerful nonetheless. Peace is not when there's no noise. Peace is when you no longer let the noise control you. And you wonder, what would it feel like to stop? To stop rehearsing conversations before they happen. To stop catastrophizing every missed text or awkward silence. To stop believing that if you just think hard enough, you'll feel safe. Safety doesn't come from control. It comes from trust. And trust isn't something you think into existence. It's something you practice one surrender at a time. You think back to that moment in the shower when you realized your entire body was clenched. You weren't in danger. You weren't even stressed. But your body was braced for something anyway. That's what constant control does. It wires your nervous system for war, even in peacetime. But tonight, maybe you ask yourself a different question. Not, how do I fix this? But what am I afraid will happen if I don't? That question, that quiet, unsettling question, is the one that leads to freedom. Not because it gives you an answer, but because it reveals the truth. You're not lazy. You're not overdramatic. You're not broken. You're just tired of trying to be in charge of a world that was never yours to command. And maybe just for a moment, you allow yourself to exhale, to let your shoulders drop, to let the tower fall. Because peace doesn't come from building perfect walls. It comes from knowing you'll still be okay when they fall. You've tried letting go before, but it never quite worked, did it? Not the way people said it would. You were told to just breathe, just be present, just stop thinking. But no one explained what you were supposed to do when the silence came. Because when you stopped thinking, you didn't feel peace. You felt panic. The thoughts, as noisy, entangled as they were, gave you something to hold. Without them, you felt like you were falling, like you'd pulled the plug on a machine you didn't know how to restart. Letting go isn't peaceful at first. It's disorienting. You're so used to being inside the current of your thoughts that stillness feels like absence, like loss. And in some ways, it is. Letting go means releasing control, yes, but it also means surrendering identity. You've built a version of yourself around your ability to anticipate, to think ahead, to analyze. Who are you without that? You wonder, and that's where the resistance hides. Not in the thoughts themselves, but in your attachment to them. There's a metaphor in Eastern philosophy, the monkey mind. Always swinging, always chattering, never still. But here's the part they don't often talk about. You've grown attached to the monkey. You've fed it, let it sit on your shoulder. Sometimes it even feels like a friend. So when someone says, just be mindful, your mind hears, kill the monkey, and it rebels. Because you're not just trying to quiet your thoughts, you're trying to separate from something that's felt like you for years. Alan Watts once said, "The mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive." He also warned, "You cannot get rid of the mind with the mind." And yet that's what most of us try to do. You catch yourself overthinking, and your first instinct is to think your way out of it. More logic, more control, more rules. But you're learning that this is not a battle. It's a shift. Instead of silencing the mind, you can learn to sit beside it, to watch it chatter, spiral, repeat, and not follow every thread it pulls. You can say, "Ah, there you are again," without judgment. That's not detachment. That's compassion. You remember last week sitting in traffic when your mind started spiraling about something you said in a meeting. It was a small thing, a harmless comment, but your thoughts ran wild, constructing scenes of offense, regret, embarrassment. You nearly missed your turn. That wasn't logic. That was a trigger. And instead of battling it, maybe what you needed in that moment was to recognize it not as fact, but as fear. Not as reality, but as reaction. You're starting to understand that the mind doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be held. You've spent years trying to outrun or overpower your thoughts. But what if you simply sat with them? What if you offered them tea instead of shields? There's a concept in mindfulness practice, non-attachment, the art of letting thoughts pass through like clouds, not rejecting them, not clinging to them, just letting them be. It sounds so simple, but it takes practice, because there will always be that urge to engage, to respond, to resolve. But not every thought is an emergency. Not every feeling is a call to action. Some are just passing through. And when you learn to let them pass, something unexpected happens. The silence stops feeling scary. It starts feeling sacred. You begin to crave it, not as escape, but as home. You realize that stillness was never emptiness. It was space. Space for breath, for healing, for noticing that you are more than your thoughts. You are the one who watches them. And when you remember that even for a second, the grip loosens. You stop trying to win against your own mind. You start walking beside it. And that's when things begin to change. Not all at once, but gently, like light shifting across a quiet room. You've called it laziness before. That heaviness, that fog, the ache of just getting through a Tuesday afternoon. The way even the smallest task feels like dragging your feet through wet sand. You've looked at yourself in the mirror and asked, "What's wrong with me?" But what if nothing's wrong? What if your body isn't being lazy? It's asking for mercy. The truth is, you weren't designed to function in constant mental overdrive. No one is. Your nervous system isn't built to be alert all the time. And yet, For so long, that's what you've demanded of yourself. It's no wonder you feel exhausted. There's a concept in trauma research called fawn mode, the habit of people-pleasing, over-apologizing, over-preparing. It's a survival mechanism. You do everything you can to avoid conflict or rejection. You overthink because you're trying to preempt harm. But it comes at a cost. It keeps you constantly wired, constantly analyzing, constantly preparing for something to go wrong. So when you finally get a chance to rest, your body collapses, not because it's weak, but because it was strong for too long. Rest is not indulgence, it's repair. Virginia Woolf once wrote, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. But even if you're not trying to write novels, the deeper truth remains. You need space to create anything, clarity, peace, self-understanding. Without rest, your mind turns into a battlefield. Every thought is a threat. Every moment of stillness is seen as wasted. And slowly, the idea of rest starts to feel like guilt. You're not lazy. You're grieving the pressure, the expectations, the version of you who thought you had to earn your worth through performance, through perfection, through being the one who never stops. But you're stopping now, and you're realizing something. Stillness is not the enemy. Stillness is where the real work happens. Not the kind that wins awards or gets likes, but the kind that rebuilds you from the inside. The kind that rewires your nervous system and says, "We're safe now. You can breathe." You remember lying on the couch one weekend, unable to get up. You had things to do, but you stayed there. You felt guilty, of course you did, but you also felt human, not productive, not perfect, just human. That was a sacred moment. That was your body reclaiming its right to pause. Tonight you return to that truth. You stop trying to solve your overthinking and instead offer it compassion. You thank your brain for all the ways it tried to protect you, the logic, the planning, the spinning, and you tell it softly that it can rest now. Because you're not a machine. You're not a to-do list with legs. You are allowed to rest, to not have all the answers, to be unsure, to stop thinking for a while and simply be, and maybe in that being, you'll discover something you've been too tired to see that you are already enough. Not when you finish the list, not when you fix yourself, but now, as you are, in this quiet moment, with the lights off, and your heart beating, and your mind finally mercifully beginning to slow. You're here, not at the end of your thoughts, maybe, but at the edge of something softer. So take a breath, not a deep one, just enough to notice the way your chest moves. Let the rhythm of your body remind you that you're alive, and that you don't have to earn that. The world will wait. The conversations, the emails, the unfinished to-do lists, they can all exist without your constant monitoring, at least for tonight. You are not abandoning them. You are choosing, just for now, to return to yourself. Maybe you'll lie there a while longer, eyes unfocused, listening to the hum of your room. Maybe you'll hear your own heartbeat and feel for the first time in days like it belongs to you again. Nothing has to change right away. You may still overthink tomorrow. You may still spin when something feels uncertain, but you'll do it with more awareness now, with more kindness, with the quiet knowledge that every loop has an exit and that peace does not require perfection. It just asks for presence. So rest now. Let the corners of your mind grow dim. Let the sharp edges soften. Let your thoughts float gently, like paper boats carrying everything you can't solve, and letting it drift for now. You are safe, you are tired, and you are allowed to stop. Sleep well, dear thinker.